this brings me to the question I had about your biography and looking at your Comandon, the Cognac family, Cognac wine maker, rather. You're the fifth president, the fifth person running, or fifth or sixth over 200 years. It's pretty extraordinary to think that this company for so long, we haven't talked about your, we've talked about your expertise, but your particular company and how, people can get access to the history of the website. But I'm just curious to hear how you see yourself. Maybe just talk about how yourself in relationship with these history of only 5 people running this ship, if you will.
The cognac industry, well, there's 2 groups, but it's very family oriented.
So is your company, sorry to interrupt, typical? I mean, there's 2 groups.
Yes.
Okay.
It's typical.
In terms of just the relatively few leaders over a long period of time running the operations.
It's actually very typical. So what you see is typical is 3 scenarios. One is a company that was started by someone, and then 200 years after is you see family relatives that are still in charge, and they may not have the same name because oftentimes it could go through the daughter sometimes, and therefore the name changes, but it's still a family member, but it went through the daughter's name. So that's why you could have seen changes of names. That's the one configuration. That's the most traditional, classic, it's same family and so forth. So that's quite remarkable because you can really see that there is a knowledge and there is a pride in the work, and it's very much of a farmer's type of mentality.
Like a family recipe almost, if you will.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously it's much more than that, but that.
Yes.
That sentiment.
Yeah, there's this sentiment. There's the sentiment of the attachment to the land, and the fact that people have stayed around and they've sustainably kept the business going for so many years. So that's why I find cognac really good in terms of sustainability within all the definitions of sustainability. I think it's quite remarkable. That's one configuration. Another one is the second configuration is that you have this family business that went from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 generation, and they could be the same name, so you can tell it's the same family. And then suddenly now it doesn't belong to the family. It belongs to a big corporation. And so what has happened is the cognac has always been a business that has been sustainable. There's ups and downs, there's wars and conflict, import, export, custom, relationship, political conflict, and like the one happened in the US at the end of 2019 when they raised the taxes for importing wine and spirits. President Trump didn't do it for the cognacs, but it could have been. So he did it for the wine. So then suddenly the wine business went down because America is oftentimes the biggest market for many products. So it is for cognac, for example, and it is probably for French wine as well. Anyway, not all French wine, but maybe just a specific group of French wine. So, and therefore those conflicts suddenly create some difficult times, and sometimes it's not a conflict, sometimes it's an opportunity. And the opportunity is the fact that they could expand distribution if they were to share the business with a much bigger company. So the type of much bigger company are companies that have been successful in acquiring multiple spirits, multiple wines. And therefore, because they have multiple spirits and wines, they are able to have 10, 20, 100, thousands of employees managing those 200 brands of wine and spirits. And then they are actually controlling the distribution, because you see, the big problem in the wine and spirits that people don't realize is it's not so much to make it. I mean, to make it is difficult, but it's mostly to get it to the consumer, because there's a lot of protectionism between the consumer and the producer, and this distribution as being in the hands of a fewer people. And these fewer people are making it difficult for anyone to join in, making it difficult to the point that it's not impossible, but it's close to being impossible. So those companies that have had hundreds of different brands, eventually they have so many employees and so many brands that they can start opening a branch of their business, which is not just the ownership of those brands, but the distribution of their own brands, which give them much more independence. They own the brand, they distribute the brand, and they distribute across all kinds of countries. So eventually those big company shows up at the door of those, at this fifth generation with a name, we'll call them Smith, just to give a generic name. And they say, we like your Smith Cognac, and we see that you sell well and all that, but with us, you would double, you would triple, you would multiply by 10. And eventually it's such a interesting idea that these families says, okay, so what do we need to get this done? And then those companies says, we need 51%. And then they acquire 51% and everyone is sort of happy, or at least that generation, that sixth generation, because they get a good sum of money, and everyone is happy. But I believe in many cases that the next generation are going to be, the money is going to be dissolved in the air. And those big companies, eventually what they're going to do is they're going to get 52, 60%, 70%. And once you get to 70%, you may as well sell everything, because you just get the money and you can budget it the way you want it. So that's the second cases. And then that's when you see, after a matter of time, that there's no more the name of the original name that was entitled there, but it belongs to a big corporation. So that's the case of the four biggest cognac company, which were originally family owned. Then there's the third case where in fact you have acquisition of those family and then the continuity of the tradition, but it's not through the family relationship. It's the case of Comandon, where you had originally the first three generations were relatives, and then the fourth generation, which was the Sarrazin, which was a friend of the family, who was working as a president because the family has already sold shares to actually one of those big groups. And so they sort of walked away because, it's hard work. I mean, it's easier to spend than to make money. So eventually what they do is they end up with getting money, and then they go, why am I going to work? Let's have someone else. So Pierre Sarrazin was the fourth generation, and he...
That's the sustainability piece right there too, the human sustainability. The idea that you don't want to do that work, that undermines the very thing you're profiting from in a way, or the very thing that's keeping it going.
That's
by
right.
Walking away because you're not of lack of interest, or it's beneath you, or whatever the reason. That seems to be a tipping point away from the original concept, right?
The more you give people, the more they're supposed to work. But if you give them more and they work the same, and you give them more and they work the same, and more and more and more work the same, they just don't work anymore. They just say, you know what, I've got used to not working as much and making more. Now I take a leave. And so that's what happens is eventually the Commandant family says, you know what, let it move to Pierre and to, at the time, the big company was called Benedictine, and it's a very famous liquor. And Benedictine eventually, after Pierre Sarrazin, came Philippe Mitterrand. So Philippe Mitterrand is not so famous as much as his brother, because his brother was the president of France for 14 years. And so his brother, Philippe Mitterrand, was the president of Commandon, while his brother was the French president. So there was a lot of Commandant Cognac when you went to the Élysée, which is like the White House of France. So that's what they were serving first, is Commandant Cognac. So back in the 80s, that was the most popular cognac in Paris, Élysée, and all the government official places. And after Philippe Mitterrand, he was working for Benedictine, and eventually Benedictine was purchased by one of the biggest companies in the world called Bacardi. And this is when we acquired Commandon and started over with my family. So it was very much of a revival because at that time, Commandon had fallen into pieces. And so that was also a very historian type of work that we did, collecting information in terms of presentation, in terms of the image, in terms of all the things that they had done for the 200 years prior. And it was very interesting to do this research in order to rebuild what Comandon is about.